Welcome to the Southern RAC, Tuesday, April 13th. And this is the RAC where we talk about permit numbers and both antlered and antlerless permit numbers. So we want to welcome the public. Thanks everyone that's joining us online. Hopefully we're getting to the end of this online period. I know many of us can't wait to get back together for live meetings. Let's cross our fingers that we're getting to the end. To start the meeting, if I can read a statement on these digital meetings to start the meeting, I'll just read that verbatim. Due to the continued presence of COVID-19 in Utah and associated public health and safety risks, large public gatherings are still strongly discouraged by the CDC and many local health departments. Based on these risks and recommendations, the Division of Wildlife Resources and the chair of this public body have determined that Regional Advisory Council and Wildlife Board meetings will continue in a purely electronic format for the time being. Anyone wishing to comment on agenda topics in future meetings or to observe this meeting may do so by logging on to the Division's webpage, where instructions and links are provided. So at this point, unfortunately, we're probably all too used to this format. There are going to be some good changes as we go forward when we come out of this. The presentations that are posted prior to these meetings, and we assume that everyone's had a chance to watch those. The Wildlife Board asks that we do those going forward. So there are some good things that we've learned coming out of this. Having said that, I'm sure we're all excited to get back to live meetings. You get much better feedback and discourse in a live meeting. So we're all anxiously awaiting that. However, we'll proceed today as is. To start the meeting off, if we can just introduce everybody, we do have a new member on the RAC tonight, Chuck Chamberlain. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, who you represent, and maybe just a short background?
Yeah, my name is Chuck Chamberlain. I'm representing the Forest Service. I'm a native of Southern Utah. I was raised in Zion National Park. Great place to live, hard place to make a living. I worked for 10 years for the DWR here in Cedar City as a fish biologist over Panguitch Lake and Fish Lake, the Boulder Mountains. So I'm familiar with most of this territory. Just moved back to the area a year ago. I'm the wildlife coordinator for both the Dixie and the Fish Lake National Forest. I'm happy to be here.
Thanks. We're happy to have you. Just a comment for those watching, it is Chuck Chamberlain. He's logged in on his wife's computer. So Dana is his wife. Just a note there. My name is Braden Richmond. I'm the Southern RAC Chair. I represent sportsmen and I'm from Beaver, Utah. And then let's just go down the list that I have here and have everyone quickly introduce themselves, who they represent and where you live. Start with you, Austin.
Austin Atkinson, Cedar City, Utah, representing public at large.
Thank you. Has Bart joined us? Oh, Bart is on. Great. Bart?
Bart Batista, live in Kanab, and I represent non-consumptive.
Thanks, Bart. Gene?
Gene Boardman, Hinckley, Utah, representing the public at large.
Riley? No, Riley was on. Maybe we lost him. Hopefully he comes back. Chad.
Chad Utley, St. George, representing public at large.
Nick.
Nick Jorgensen, St. George, representing the non-consumptive.
Thanks, Nick. And then Verland. No, Verlin was on too. Verlin, are you on mute? Right. Hopefully Verlin comes back. Craig.
Craig Love from Burl, Utah, representing agriculture.
Thanks, Craig. Tammy?
Tammy Pearson, Minersville, Beaver County, elected official.
Thanks, Tammy. And Dan?
Dan Fletcher, Cedar City, representing Bureau of Land Management.
Thanks, Dan. Did Riley or Verlin, or did either of you get back on? Okay, well, hopefully they join us here in a minute. Let's move on to the first item here. We need to recognize the minutes from our last meeting and agenda. So we'd entertain a motion on that if there's not any questions.
I'll make a motion on that to approve the minutes.
Thanks, Tammy. Do we have a second? Sorry, who was that? Chad seconded. So Tammy made a motion, Chad seconded. I guess we'll do a roll call. Austin.
Yes.
Bart.
Yes.
Gene.
Yes.
Riley. Chad.
Yes.
Nick.
Yes.
Chuck.
Yes.
Verland.
Yes.
Craig.
Yes.
Tammy.
Yes.
And Dan.
Yes.
Passes unanimously. Thank you. And then on to the first informational item, agenda item number 3, the Wildlife Board meeting update. Oh yeah, let's back up. Verlin, would you mind just introducing who you are, who you represent, and where you live quickly? We lost you for a second there.
Yeah, you did. Verlin King, I represent agriculture. I live in Bicknell, Utah.
Thanks, Verlin. So we've had several meetings since our last meeting, but let me go first to the Wildlife Board meeting. Oh, now Riley Peck's back on. We'll go back one more time. Riley Roberts. Riley, do you want to introduce yourself quickly, who you represent and where you live?
Riley Roberts, Tropic, Utah sportsman.
Thanks, Riley. I think we're all here. I think we have 100% attendance, so that's great. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate everybody making the effort to be here. So let me first go back to the January 5th board meeting, which was mainly dealing with bears, and then also, landowner permits, right? So there were only 2 motions in the meeting. The first motion that we approve the actual permit number recommendations as presented by the division during the board meeting. And that passed 5-1 with Wade Heaton declaring a conflict of interest. And that was on the Landowner Association permit recommendations. The second motion was on the Black Bear rule amendments and recommendations. And the motion was to accept the division's recommendations as presented. And that passed unanimously. So there was a fair amount of discussion in the board meeting, but both motions or both recommendations passed as presented. Any questions on that one before I move on? Okay, I also wanted to just bring up, and hopefully people have had the chance to watch it. Hopefully the public's had the chance to watch it. There was also a working meeting that the division presented to the Wildlife Board at the Wildlife Board's request to discuss this meeting and how they got the numbers, how the division came up with their recommendations and what was going to be presented in this meeting. For those that had a chance to watch it, there's been some really good feedback. They had some great information. I would strongly recommend that people take the opportunity to watch that. It is a long meeting, but if you watched even the first 2 segments and then went to your specific region, I think it would really help everybody understand how this process is done and probably answer many of the questions that we all get day in and day out as we talk to our constituents and try to field concerns. I thought it was very well done. Did anyone have a chance to watch that or any comments on that? Questions on that?
Yeah, I watched it. I thought it was really informative too. I really enjoyed it, and I wish a lot of other people would watch it to understand what we have to deal with, particularly in our drought conditions right now. That's really, it was really informative that way.
Yeah.
I thought the presentations were really well done in that. Helped a lot.
Good, thank you. Yeah, and if you haven't had a chance, we'd invite anyone. It's easy to find on YouTube. You can just go to the division's YouTube page and it's right there. So actually, I guess one other meeting I would bring up is they also had the meeting, I forget what it's called, but it's where they allocate all the money for the conservation program. I watched that the other day. I watch that every year. that's another meeting I'd really recommend that people take the time to watch. If you ever wonder where the money goes that's raised by these conservation permits and how Utah is able to accomplish so much, that meeting's just eye-opening. Really informative and very eye-opening to the work that's happening in Utah that we're fortunate to have. The other states don't get that. They don't have that kind of money that we do to do that. So a couple good meetings that are posted on YouTube right now if anyone wants to watch those. One other, or the last item I want to discuss quickly is all of us, I'm sure, got plenty of, maybe we got tired of emails and conversations on this one. HB 295 caused a lot of conversation, both for and against, but that has been signed into law at this point. I just want to read a couple of the general notes on that. So that bill prohibits big game baiting for the purpose of hunting, requires Wildlife Board to pass rules regarding use of trail cameras, prohibits commercial guiding on waterfall management areas without a COR, and requires a Wildlife Board to initiate rulemaking on a commercial guide permitting system on wildlife management areas, and then prohibits construction of new permanent blinds on waterfall management areas. Obviously, the most of the conversation was around the baiting and the trail cameras. Just a note on that, there's been some confusion of when that baiting will take effect because it wasn't in the rules and regulations book that the division released the first of the year. But the governor signed that into law. That's a legal item, not something the division carried. And that goes into effect on May 15th. So that is law and goes into effect on May 15th. Kevin, is there anything you want to add to that? Any other comments?
No, Braden, I think you did a pretty good job. I'm happy to try to answer any questions, but I think Braden covered the basic information on those two items.
Any other questions from the RAC on that?
I was just curious what the timetable would be on rules on the cameras, because that was quite controversial.
You know, great question, Craig. And I did get a little bit of clarification on that. So on some of you may have seen it or heard anyways, the division sent out a survey regarding technology and trying to gather some information. The division is planning on presenting that information during the next round of RACs. And then at some point, trail cameras and rules will come through the RAC process to the Wildlife Board to make a decision on how we're going to handle trail cameras in Utah.
Thank you.
Craig, just to add a little bit more to that, at the board work session, the board, they couldn't make any motions because it wasn't a regular public meeting, but they made a request that the division send out a survey that's specific to trail cameras to gather additional information. So that will be coming in the coming weeks and months, and then there'll be a rule proposed on that topic. I would guess, sometime this summer.
Thanks, Kevin. Any other questions or comments there? All right, well, let's move into item number 4, regional update. Turn it over to Kevin.
Thanks, Braden. I'll be brief because we've got probably a long meeting ahead of us. Be going with it. Our wildlife section is right in the middle of doing sage grouse let counts right now. If you've never had an opportunity to do that, I would suggest that you contact one of our biologists or even me. I have a couple of leks that I cover. I'd be glad to take you out. One of my favorite wildlife experiences is going out in the spring early in the morning and watching sage grouse out on their lek. And it's important data that we collect. Part of what kept sage grouse from being listed several years ago was because of the long-term, decades-long data set that we have on sage grouse let counts. The biologists are also starting their spring range assessments. They are picking up deer collars as some deer are dying from migration or whatever reason their collars go inactive. On a non-game side, we're beginning our prairie dog counts around Cedar City and Panguitch and over in Wayne County to make sure we're collecting the data there. We are in the process, I'll say, in creating a conservation strategy for prairie dogs, which I'm very hopeful will lead to a delisting of that species in the coming years. It's not going to be a quick process, but we have a very strong case to make that prairie dogs don't meet the definition of threatened or endangered under the Endangered Species Act. So we will be pursuing that. And like I said, it will be a couple of years for that process to work itself through. Our upland game and waterfowl biologists are busy improving habitat. This is the time of year where they can get a lot done. From our aquatic section, Richard's suggestion is when you go fishing now, ice is coming off most of the lakes and conditions are good, but given kind of the level of the reservoirs now and the lack of snowpack, conditions are likely to deteriorate over the summer. So now is going to be the best fishing of the year, and he's really encouraging everybody to get out and take advantage of that. Speaking of drought, our habitat biologists are monitoring those conditions and working closely with the federal biologists to do so, and a lot of communication going back and forth there. Our seasonal road closures will end April 30th on our wildlife management areas. We're approaching the end of a long restoration season and just starting the next restoration season. In the southern region alone for fiscal year 22, which will begin in July 1st of this year, we have proposed 77 projects, which total a total of 110,000 upland acres, 2,500 riparian acres, 129 miles of stream restoration, and 6 water developments. Now, not all of that will be funded, but that just gives you an idea of the scope of the amount of work that's out there and ready to be done as funding becomes available. Our outreach section wants everybody to know that they're getting ready to offer in-person hunter safety classes, and please monitor our website for more information on that. They're also right now scheduling deer-specific dedicated hunter projects, and again, check the website there. And as always, we encourage the dedicated hunters to get your hours in early. There's always a rush just before the archery season starts, and some people get frustrated. It's hard to have much sympathy for them at that point when there's been lots of opportunity in the months before to get their hours in. From our admin section and the ladies up front for the landowners, and Tammy and Berland and Craig and you guys, if you would help us get the word out. Last year, we ran out of our landowner deer permits early. That will probably happen again this year. So the earlier people can get their applications in, the more likely they are to be able to obtain their permits. We went for years where we always had enough permits. That has changed. And we had a lot of frustrated landowners come in just before the rifle hunt started last year, and because they were unable to get their permits, which it's easy to understand their frustration because that had always worked in the past. Things have changed in terms of the number of permits that are out there, which changes means that there's more landowners trying to get those permits, and we've run out of them the last couple of years, and that will happen again this year. So if you would help us get the word out, we're sending emails and postcards and everything to get the word out ourselves, but any help would be appreciated. And that's all I have, unless anybody has any questions.
Hey, Kevin, how soon do you start your landowner? It usually doesn't start till the 1st of July, does it?
Well, applications will be, we will begin accepting applications May 1st.
Okay.
And so the earlier people can get their applications in, the better. An application's not completed until we've actually sold the permit. And so we need to go through the whole process, get your application in, get your hunters identified, and then have them come in and purchase their permit. And get all the way through that process is what we need to encourage people to do.
Perfect. Thanks.
That's good to know.
All All right, well, let's move on with item number 5. So that's the buck deer permit recommendations for 2021. And I'll turn it back over to Kevin again to give us a summary of the public comment.
Public comment now? Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to do it a little bit different this time. I'll add a little more detail to the public comments than we've done in the past. I think to give you a better sense of the comments that came in rather than just who agrees and who doesn't. Let me go through those numbers first. First, we had 32 comments submitted specific to this agenda item. Of those, 53% strongly agreed with the presentation, and then an additional just over 9% somewhat agreed. So we had about over 60% of people agreeing, and then 15% neither agreed or disagreed, 6% somewhat disagreed, and 15% of the people that commented strongly disagreed. Now, the comments, as I went through the comments, I tried to identify themes that were present in those comments. I certainly didn't capture everything, but kind of the things that kept coming up repeatedly in people's comments. The thing that was mentioned most was a recommendation for shorter seasons, and some of those were specific to the archery season. Some people, although they supported the reduction in permits that are being proposed, they would have liked to have seen more. We had a few people bring up antler restrictions, which is a theme that I don't think will ever die and comes up over and over again. We did have some people recommending that we offer no antlerless permits, and I know that one kind of goes back and forth between this agenda item and one that will come up later. And then just a few one-off comments we had. One person recommended that dedicated hunters, that program be reduced to 1 buck every 3 years instead of 2. I thought that was an interesting comment. We had one brave soul that recommended we do away with lifetime licenses, which I think would cause a rebellion amongst some of our older hunters that are lucky enough to have those. So anyway, lots of different comments. I hope that's helpful to know kind of the main themes that were in the comments that people sent in.
You know, if I can make one comment there, a lot of the public comments do really deal with rules and regulations, which is the November RAC. This one we're dealing with permit numbers, so maybe just a reminder there to stay on task, and we will deal with rules and regulations in November. Also, a lot of those adjustments, or if we really want to look at those, should be done during the management plans, which those are on a cycle and rotation. We can ask, and get some more information on that if needed, but maybe just a reminder that this RAC we're dealing with permit numbers, that's really the primary discussion. So with that, again, yeah, go ahead, Kevin.
Just one other thing, probably the comment that was repeated most often was just an appreciation for the recommendations. I didn't tally those, but that was the most repeated theme, and an appreciation for our biologists, which I was really grateful to hear. Those guys take a beating, and to have an acknowledgement of a kind of a thank you was good to have. Good to hear.
And I think having these presentations available to the public, and then also it feels like in these presentations we're providing better data. I saw that also. It seemed like we had an above average response that agreed with the presentation and supported it. And I believe that has a lot to do with just providing better and more timely information. So it was interesting though how many agreed with the recommendations. So again, on agenda 5, it's the buck deer permit recommendations. We'll do agenda 6 is elk and pronghorn, and then we'll move to once in a lifetime. So agenda 5 is just the buck deer recommendations. Just a quick comment as we go into this. The proposal is to decrease about 4,900 permits statewide. The majority of those are coming out of the southern unit. So with that said, we'll open it up to questions from the RAC.
Chair, this is Austin. I do have a question, if I may. I watched the Wildlife Board work session as far as all of the presentations. And I have a question for Covy or for the biologists. I appreciate all the work that's gone into figuring out why our deer herds are where they are at. And obviously it was predators and now it's drought. And I think all of those are valid factors. But if we grew deer in 2010 through 2016, as Covy stated, we shot a bunch of does, especially in southern Utah, and now we have no deer. My question is, are we too late on these severe cuts, mainly the Beaver, the Panguitch, Mount Dutton, or would you say those cuts are timely and we're reacting as we should have on those cuts?
Austin, I can take some of that and try to explain it, but I think we just have to make sure that we separate the two issues between, the number of deer on the landscape definitely affects the number of bucks on the landscape and therefore buck harvest. And when we made these cuts to buck permits specifically, the cuts are intended to manage to the agreed upon ratio post-season. So when we made these cuts, I think it's important to acknowledge this won't bolster populations. What will bolster populations is the habitat work, the increased reduction in predators where predator loads are high, and hopefully some moisture, some adequately timed moisture. So these cuts, they follow the data. So basically, when we run calculations on buck-doe ratios, survival, adult survival, fawn survival, and everything else, we just run the numbers of bucks on the landscape, average success and what harvest looks like, and then what we can pull out next year and still meet our buck-doe ratio objectives in the plan, if that makes sense. And so they're timely is the answer. They're timely in the fact that they will help us manage to the plan annually. And to address the populations that have fallen off, we've pulled back on doe harvest, we've increased predator harvest, and we've continued habitat work. And those are the things that we hope and we continue to work towards to bring deer back. Does that answer the question, Austin? Or did I miss some of it?
Oh, thanks, Covy. I think that answers my question. I think the public sentiment that I get is, thank you for cutting these tags, but we've been asking for this for a while, seeing that as, did you miss something? Did the biologist recommend it and it get shut down? Or is this just how we react? A buck deer recommendation on permits is simply a reaction to the state of the union, if you will.
Yeah, I think that's it. Buck deer permits take into account all the data that there are, and then we just adjust annually based on, all right, here's where we are. What does the surplus look like? What can we harvest? More surplus, more harvest, less surplus, less harvest. And I don't want to convey the message that we did this to bring populations back. Now, we are doing other things to bring populations back, and I do want to convey that message. We're not throwing in the towel. We're working hard on deer, and if things line up, we'll grow some deer again, and we'll keep working.
I have a question. Last year we had a big cut, and it all fell on the general public. And this year, you've known that cut wouldn't be restored and that there'd be more cut. And what has been done to spread the misery besides just cutting off the general public?
Gene, so when we did that, we reevaluated. So conservation permits are on a 3-year cycle. They were reevaluated and readjusted. They'll be readjusted this year. Those will be reduced. We made recommendations on landowner association permits in accordance with the number of permits that we recommended through this cycle. So we've taken into account all of that. And when wildlife's down, everybody pays just a little. So even if it goes back up over the next 3 years, the conservation permits and other things that are for sale of the highest bidder are based off of this year for the next 3 years. So they may not, we may have an increase and they may not have an increase. So it cuts both ways, I guess, is my point. And we do adjust those based on public permits.
I have more on conservation permits when we get to the last item, but these permits are general area deer permits is what I'm talking about. Like our landowner association, there's an, I guess the question is, are we really helping out the public, and is the public on your mind when you make these recommendations?
Gene, that's I say this probably too often, can't remind the rest of this house, but that's a really good question. And I would say definitely when we go through and make recommendations, we think about the animal and species first and the public second. And I read a lot of the comments, I read a lot of the forums. I probably shouldn't, but I do. And the two things on every biologist's mind is, what is this going to do for the species? What's it going to do for the management plan? And how does this affect the public? It's hard to see us decrease permits like this and know what that means. It definitely means less hunting. And it also means that we're going to manage to what we've agreed to manage to. But thanks for asking that.
Okay, one more question along this same line is the ability of people to buy privilege in order to obtain these tags. What about that ability to buy privilege?
Kevin, do you understand that? Maybe I'm missing that one.
So Gene, if that question is also specific to the general season, there isn't an ability to buy privilege. There are some permits that are given to landowners, but they're just permits. They're not vouchers. They can't be sold. The conservation permit, like as we mentioned, is a different deal. So if we're talking about general season deer permits, I'm not sure what the question is there.
Okay. The question goes to, and I'll get to it in the comments, but the question goes to buy-in hours in the dedicated hunter program.
Yeah, Kevin.
That's a program where you give a little to get a little to get a little, and it's open to, I guess it's open to anybody. It does cost a little bit more, and you have to give service hours. So it's not a free option, I guess. There is. I don't know, Gene. It's true what you're saying. If somebody wants to get in the dedicated hunter program, does increase their odds. It's a program that as a state we've decided works well for us, and the public process has supported. Not 100%, but overall, it's a strongly supported program. So through the public process. So I guess that's probably the best I can do to answer that.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask one more question. Again,
go ahead.
This is Austin. Question about splitting units, more so as it appeals to general season deer. It seems like in other species, we focus harvest or pressure on certain areas, and we've created subunits of subunits, if you will. But on general season deer, there's sentiment that some of these units are too large So I'm curious if there's a reason why we can't split them. Example being the Ochre Stansberry. There's one that keeps coming up, Beaver East versus Beaver West. Can you give me some insight on why we don't do that more? Or is there a reason?
No, Austin. So sometimes it comes down to management scale and data collection, and some of the smaller subunits may not provide enough data to be managed alone. However, you just mentioned some of the probably better examples that we can take a harder look at. I think Ochre Stansberries, we've got good collar data there. Those deer don't exchange much, and the dynamic between units is very different now. I used to have more public access on the Ochre side, and now where that's changed and there's minimal public access on the Ochre side and the majority of the public access on the Stansberry side, there's a couple of those that we probably need to start looking at and seeing, all right, does it make sense to split these out and manage them a little differently? So I think we'll be looking at that over the next couple of years.
When would be the appropriate time for that to come up on our yearly schedule? And should that come from the RACs to be recommended, or should we wait for the division on those?
It could come either way. So the appropriate time would definitely be November when we're setting unit boundaries. But that could come either from the RACs or, I would suggest work with the local biologists, discuss this and see how they feel about it and what it as on the ground biologists, what the pros and cons would be of splitting some of those units. And after, if they're interested in invested sportsmen that want to work with the local biologists, then we can come back and work through the divisions process and see where that lands. I don't think we have a hard opposition to splitting a unit where it makes sense. And some make sense, some don't. And also there's some public sentiment behind it as well. So there's the social aspect too, where some folks that hunt the beaver will spend the majority of their time hunting Beaver East, but they may spend a couple days out on Beaver West. And so where there's no negative biological impact to having them lumped, the social aspect is on both sides. Some say, hey, I don't want you to pigeonhole me into a small area. We went from statewide to region-wide to unit-wide, and now you're telling me you're going to cut down the size of my unit, and I'm really frustrated. So there's definitely multiple sides to this argument. Some we could direct pressure a little better, and there may be some upside.
Covy and Austin, can I interject real quick? This is Justin Shannon. I was going to say a good time to have those conversations is when the unit management plans are up for review, because at that point they're looking at not only the boundaries of the unit, but they're looking at everything, the management of those units as a whole, and those go on rotation every 5 years. That's not to say that we can't do it in November, but if we make changes midstream, then suddenly we have changes in how we hunt and manage, and it doesn't always align with that plan. And so I would say when the unit management plan is up, that's probably the most ideal time, but it doesn't mean the RAC and board can't look at things each November. So.
Justin, thanks for interjecting that.
Covy or Justin, question on that: is there a place where the public can go and look and see when those management plans are coming up for review? That's on the division side, I'm assuming. Could you just verify that the public can get on there and see when those plans are up for review?
You want me to take that, Covy, or you got it?
Yeah, you go ahead, Justin.
So all of our unit plans are on our division website, and it'll have a date that it was approved by the Wildlife Board, and we rotate around the state. And so essentially we'll do the southern region, update all those unit plans, and then we'll go to the southeast region, essentially the northeast for the most part. And then the only time it gets really complicated is when we do things like the Manti, which is managed halfway with the central and southeast. And so I think we can be a little bit more clear on when that's due, but if every unit management plan is available, and so you can see kind of when that 5-year window is coming up. So
Thank you. I appreciate that. I've had a few questions lately. A lot of confusion out there. People think there's just a statewide management plan and not a unit specific. So I just think that's good to add that clarity. I have one additional question, and this kind of goes back to Jean's question, if that's okay. Wondering, and I think Lindy may have this information. I kind of warned Kevin that I was going to ask this, but Jean, you know, he expressed some concern about the public input of these tag cuts. And I appreciated your answer, Covy, that first we look biologically and then second we look at a social issue. But we're cutting 4,900 tags this year, which are mostly in Southern Unit. Last year, we had a pretty substantial cut as well. And what we're seeing is we're seeing increases every year in applications, particularly in the Southern Unit. It's taking more and more points to draw. And as we continue to cut tags, it's going to get increasingly challenging. So I was hoping that we could see what it's looked like over the past 5 years, what it took to draw these units, and with the tag cuts and predicting the upcoming years of applications, what it's going to look like. And that's not to say that these tag cuts are inappropriate. I agree with them, but I do think it's good for people to realize what this means for their drawing odds.
Hi, Lindy. Thanks, Braden, or Mr. Chairman, for bringing that up. I did pull that data for you guys. I went back to 2016, and I did by each unit. So if you have a question about any unit within the Southern region, I can tell you. But overall, between all of the regions in the Southern region, all of the units, it takes about 2.5 years. So 2.4 of drawing out. So 1 in every 2.4 people will draw out. So about every 2 to 3 years. And that was in 2016. And by going off this year of the applications and the cuts, you're almost up to 5 years of drawing out. Now, I don't know points, how many points it will take, just because I don't have, you know, how many people have what point. I didn't look into that because I can't look into that this early in the game, because it's just not privileged to me, nor do I want that privilege to look at people's points when they apply. But based on apps and permits, it can take up to 5 years to draw a Southern region permit. Granted, that's an overall. Some units are going to be higher and some units are going to be lower. And depending on weapon type, this is just a combined archery, an illegal weapon, and muzzleloader. So some units, like say like the, let's look here, Fish Lake, you're looking at maybe around 7 years to draw a tag in Fish Lake with the applications and permit numbers. But like I said, this is all, you know, an estimate. This is not, I'm just looking at pure numbers. So things can change in the draw, but this is just an estimate.
So Lindy, based on trends, do we have any sort of prediction we can make over the next 5 years, just based on trends? So we've gone from 2.5 to 5 on average. Where are we? What would we likely be looking at 5 years from now if applications continue to increase at the rate they're currently increasing?
You're looking at 8 or 9 years to draw a Southern region tag if the trend keeps going up, because your applications are increasing by anywhere from 5 to 8% for your region. And that's every region. Like every region is increasing because our general season applications are increasing every year. But with that trend, your applications are increasing, but you guys are decreasing your permits by the same amount. So I would say 8 or 9 years. But any legal weapon may be harder. That's just a combination of all weapon types.
Thanks, Lindy. I remember when that used to look really bad on a limited entry. Now we're talking about that for general units. So
exactly, yeah. Some limited entry units you can draw out with 10 points. You know, 10 years of applying, and you're looking at that on some of these units. Like Dutton, you're looking at around 8 years to draw for a Dutton tag this year. Like I said, Kevin, I don't know people's points, so.
Sorry. Don't mean to interrupt you. My question would be, what effect does this have on out-of-state applicants? Do they get the same percentage of cut or whatever across the board? How does that work?
Yeah, Tammy, I think you asked that to me. Yes, they do. It's 10% of the tags go to non-residents, and so that adjusts with the number of tags. It stays, right now 10% is less than that 10% was a few years ago as permit numbers have gone down.
I've had several people ask me not only that, but why is it that out-of-state residents can apply for everything? They're not limited to one species like residents are. And I'm not sure if that's the case or not, but that was some of the questions I've been asked.
Covy or Lindy, you're probably better equipped to answer that than I am.
I'll let Covy take that one. I'm just kidding.
Lindy.
This sounds like a hot potato.
No, it's a hot question. I get asked that question all the time. Years ago, when the board passed that recommendation to allow all non-residents to apply, is to help them get through the draw, to draw something out in Utah, because we only offered 1 or 2 permits for that species, more or less the once in a lifetime species. And so when you offer only 10%, it's one, desert bighorn sheep tag. And so they wanted to allow the non-residents to apply for everything. So then maybe they'd have a shot at drawing something in Utah just because they're so low of numbers. But it's actually done the opposite effect, because now everyone's applying. And so their odds are getting worse, because everyone is equal. There's, you can apply for everything. And so you'll never get ahead. You'll never get in that max point round. And it's actually dropped non-residents odds dramatically. But that's the reason why.
Long story short, Tammy, it would cost our residents more money and it would hurt their draw odds.
Oh, yeah.
And so when you look at that, it's, well, I understand that looking at it from the outside, it may look like a good idea, and it would mean that you would hunt less. So we're trying to do what's best for the residents and provide more hunting opportunity in limited entry and once in a lifetime.
Okay. I didn't even know the answers, so.
Is it still true, Covy, that I think last I knew, Utah was the most restrictive on non-residents of the Western states in terms of only offering 10%. Some states are higher than that. It looks like Austin's shaking his head that might not be the case.
Yeah, I don't know that we're the most restrictive, but we're definitely not the most liberal either. We're somewhere, and we're in a good spot. And I'll tell you that when we do go out of state, there are commissioners from other state that hate on Utah pretty hard for our restrictive tendencies. And you've seen the attitude towards non-residents in Idaho and Wyoming and some of these places change a little bit. And the truth is, if any of us hunt out of state, we're the non-resident. We have a pretty fair system in Utah. I would hate to see us get more liberal. I would also hate to see us get more restrictive. It feels like we're in that sweet spot. So.
Just a comment, a lot of those non-residents are our kids or grandkids.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Gene. There are a lot of non-residents that lived here once, and luckily we all live right here in the United States, so we should be kind to each other, even if somebody is from Idaho.
I know if I hunt out of state, I'm buying a rental, or I'm renting a rental car from that state.
Braden, you're muted.
My space bar quit working. Hopefully you can hear me now. Other questions on the bug permits? We've had good questions, but I also want to keep it moving along. We can go to the comment period if we're ready. Any questions?
I'd like to ask one thing. If we could just briefly get a summary of what happened to the Dutton, the Panguitch Lake, and the Beaver to be hurt so bad.
I think those are great questions for the biologists that are on right here. So Dutton, Panguitch Lake, and Beaver. You guys can handle that in whatever order, in that order if you'd like.
Let's have Kyle take the Dutton and the Panguitch Lake, since those are both his, and then we can have Mike take the Beaver.
So on the Dutton, we're just seeing drought conditions, and mainly I think just poor fawn recruitment. And then with drought conditions and the hunting that are hunting, or I think hunting conditions were just tough as well. Panguitch Lake, we burned in 2017, right during fawning habit when the fawns were dropping. We lost a lot of fawns in 2017, and our fawn recruitment's just been low since then. So we're just not replacing a lot of younger bucks into the population. Our survival has been good the last few years on the Panguitch. It's just been our fawn survival that's struggling there.
Gene, this is Mike. I can speak on the Beaver. So when we look at our population estimate for the Beaver, we hit a high in 2015 of 14,700, and we're now down to 10,000 deer is what we're estimating. A lot of that is kind of like what Kyle's saying, due to poor fawn recruitment. We go out, every November and do deer classification, and we get fawn doe ratios from that classification. And we've seen fairly decent fawn doe ratios on the Beaver. Like in 2015, when that population was higher, we were seeing like 64 fawns per 100 does. This past year, we were all the way down to 37 fawns per 100 does, which at that point, you're not replacing enough fawns into the population to make up for what we're losing to natural mortality. So the population's been driven pretty low. Buck doe ratio has gone down with that, which is the cause for the decrease in permits. We were at 13 bucks per 100 does this year, and the objective is 18 to 20. So we're significantly below, and the dramatic cut is an attempt to try and bring that ratio back up, because that's what we've agreed to do in our unit management plans.
Okay, thank you.
With those answers to that, Mike, I'd like to maybe make a comment so I don't get this lost in the shuffle. But, this is Beaver unit especially. That's our home base here. There was a lot of public sentiment. It's been coming for years, and everybody's said it for years and years and years. And now the data is proving it. So with that being said, I had several phone calls, and I'm sure some of you did as well, on the Manti LaSalle unit, that they want a bigger cut over there, that they're seeing the same thing, and that some of the data on the fawn recruitment and that was lower than what the estimate was. And so part of the ask, and then I saw a late email just before the meeting started from SFW asking that we increase that, or decrease, I guess, the tags over there. So.
Thanks, Tammy. Tammy led us into the comments section. So let's, if there are more questions, feel free to ask, but we will open it up for comments. Let's do it in open. On some of these meetings, we've done a roll call, but let's try just open comments. We'll see how that goes. Go ahead, Austin. I see your hand raised.
Okay, I have a comment as it relates to general season deer. And I realize that I may be a little biased on this because I am younger and I was not part of the lifetime license program, but I'm going to bring this up. Lifetime license holders, active holders account for about 5% of our general season deer permit holders. So small percentage. And I'm grateful for those that invested in the lifetime license program back in the late 80s, early 90s. However, I feel that with point creep and other things we're trying to address, mainly Covy's presentation on where general season draw odds are headed, what we just talked about, and Lindy shared with us some data on that. What it's doing is we are giving these 3,500 lifetime license permit holders their general season deer tag before they go to the draw. And that happens every single year as long as they're active and alive. So as we see units like the Pine Valley, for example, we have almost 500 of those lifetime license holders jumping on Pine Valley tags, taking those away from the public draw before they are allocated in the draw. So I've reviewed our 657 on the lifetime license where it says, you know, the lifetime license holder may receive without charge a general season deer tag every year. And this came up when we went to the multi-units where they could select their unit. But I would like to bring up the comment, put it out there so we can discuss it, that I would rather see lifetime license holders participate in the general season draw and use bonus points, or sorry, use preference points in the draw, but still waive the charge, thus completing the requirement that they will not pay for their deer tag, but they must sit out. When we get to that point where units are taking 8 or 9 preference points to draw, and you realize a lifetime holder or 500 of them could have 8 or 9 tags in that same amount of time, I think that is skewed wrong and does not help with point creep on general season. Sorry that took so long, but there you go.
Thanks, Austin. Other comments? Maybe I can jump in real quick. I was also contacted by Eric Luke, I think that's who called you, Tammy, and expressed some concerns over there on Manti. Eric's very involved on that unit. He also asked some great questions to the biologist on there. And I would suggest that I think that's valid to look at that. And I would encourage this RAC to maybe make a motion on that when we get to that. It's not a significant cut for that unit, and the trends they're seeing there are similar to the trends we've seen on some of our units that are pretty scary now.
Braden, are you okay if I speak to that, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, please do. As long as you agree with me. If you disagree with me, no.
No, I never agree with you, but I'll speak to it. No, I'm just kidding. When we looked through the data on that, I think the one thing that I can say is that we may have over predicted fawn survival just a touch. And I've looked through both recommendations. I think the division's recommendation is a good recommendation, and I also think the recommendation that was that came through the other channels, through SFW or the local sportsman there, it's not a bad recommendation either. It's a little more conservative of a recommendation, and either recommendation would probably get us in the range. One's just a little more conservative, and one is a little more generous. So it's not a bad suggestion. If anything, we may have over-predicted fawn survival a touch.
Thank you. Appreciate that comment. Other comments from the RAC?
Yeah, this is Chuck. Sorry, Gene. Go ahead.
Okay, this is Gene. Going after Austin, we've got the same problem with the dedicated hunter program as far as the opportunity, and I would rip into the dedicated hunter program a whole lot more if I hadn't have talked to Blaine Cox and Brian Christensen this week, and they straightened me out on a bunch of things, and I really appreciate their efforts and what I learned from them. But the questions that I had for them didn't get completely answered, like how much what percent of the dedicated hunter hours goes to mule deer, and how much how many bought and paid for hours is in the program, and how many people buy all of their hours, which is, as I brought up in the questions, buying privilege to hunt, and buying a lot of privilege to hunt. Now, if this goes to 1 in 5 years, as Lindy said, that gives the public hunter 9 days in 5 years. If the dedicated hunter program continues on in the way that it is, it gives them about 140 days or more in 5 years to hunt. Now, where in the hell is that fair? And when I talked about the hours that are bought and paid for, realized that I asked them about the last year, and I realized that this last year with the pandemic caused a whole different dynamic there. But I was told that some people do, at the beginning of their dedicated hunter year, just write the check and they've bought the privilege. And others get in a bind and they have to buy some or all of their privilege because they couldn't get into a project. And I asked where does this money go? Does it go for mule deer? It goes to a restricted fund that can go into any kind of conservation program that the division has. So I really want the board and the division to look at this dedicated hunter program. I don't want to see it go away right now. I think they do a lot of good. And there's a lot of people there that go above and beyond in donating hours. But the selling of privilege and the extended opportunity that they get over the public has got to be looked at. And that's my comment for right now.
Thanks, Gene. Chuck?
Yeah, I guess it's a comment and a question. We're, as a Forest Service, are very supportive of the Division of Wildlife and their efforts to improve deer numbers, especially in areas where those herds are suffering. But we had a question about one unit, the Pine Valley unit, where our 3-year objective for buck doe is above objective, and our population objective is right at objective. And so I'm wondering what the rationale was for cutting those tags when we're at objective or above objective, when we're missing so many tags and looking for opportunities for hunters. So I guess kind of a comment and a question.
Jason's on, right? Does Jason want to take that?
Yeah, Jason, would you address that, please?
Sure. So with our deer projection sheets, our average survival over the last 5 years has been 60% for fawns and 84% for adults. Using that in predicting where we'll be next year after the harvest and average success on our buck hunts, last year we will be at 19 bucks per 100 does. So, and that's with the 400 permit decrease. If we didn't do that, we would probably be down around 15 to 14, 15 bucks per 100 does.
Thanks.
Any more comments from the RAC?
This is Chad. I guess I just have one comment. Is to follow up what Gene said. I really don't see a difference between service hours and paying for those service hours. They both either way, it both goes to the division and they can use it how they want. My experience, at least in the service hours, and I don't hunt, But I've seen dedicated 100 hours for all sorts of things that were not mule deer related. If they benefit the division, they put in those service hours. So I don't see the difference. You're buying it either way.
If there are more comments, please jump on. Go ahead. Someone was starting to say something.
This is Austin, Mr. Chair. One more quick comment. I would like to see, now that we've started the spot and stock cougar tags for $30 be offered. I don't feel like that was pushed very hard or marketed very well to those that had deer tags last year. Most of the deer hunters I interacted with didn't know that was an option. So as it relates to these buck deer permit recommendations, it would be nice to see a flyer, an insert, perhaps coming from system consultants when they send them their tag, say, by the way, you can buy this $30 spot and stock tag and use it this fall. I think the division could do much more to get those tags out in the field, generate some more revenue, and potentially harvest some cougars. Thank you.
We can continue to take comments. Let me also propose, if we want to, here's how I would like to look at recommendations or motions on this. If you're ready to make motions on single issues and not accept the rest as proposed, we could do a motion. You know, Austin, you brought up a couple items. Gene, you brought up an item. If we want to do motions on any individual item, we could go ahead and proceed with that, as long as we didn't do to accept the remainder as presented. That would allow us to have some more discussion and also make sure we capture the intent of the RAC. So if anyone wants to go ahead and present a motion outside of accepting the remainder.
With that, I'd propose that, let's see, that they decrease that general deer season tags on the manti by an additional 600 permits as a standalone motion.
Thanks. So Tammy made a motion to decrease by 600 on the manti unit. Do we have a second on that?
I'll second it. This is Verlin.
Verlin seconds that. Any additional discussion? All right, let's go ahead and vote on that one. Austin?
Yes.
Bart?
Yes.
Gene?
Yes.
Riley?
Yes.
Chad?
Yes.
Nick?
Yes.
Chuck?
Yes.
Verlin?
Yes.
Craig?
Yes.
Tammy?
Yes.
And Dan?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Would anyone like to make any other motions?
I'd like to get in another comment here.
Yep, go ahead, Gene.
Making lots of comments tonight. In one of the other RACs, Justin Shannon was talking about different permits, and what he said was there's all sorts of permits, and that's what I find here, that we can't keep track of all the permits that are leaked out, and it wouldn't be a hard thing for all these permits to be shown publicly. They put out a sheet about how many permits go to the public draw, and how many permits go to a landowner association. But there's about 3 or 4 tiers of landowners that get different permits, and there's the pay-to-play permits and so forth. And on each unit, we'd ought to have it all on one doggone line. Every permit that that goes out and who it goes out to. And it would be really easy, and it would be transparent as to what's going on these things. And I sure would like to see that done. I've brought it up 2 or 3 times, but it goes nowhere. But we need accountability on that.
Gene, I've heard you bring that up multiple times, and I agree with you. It would be nice to see all the permits going out in these units. We would entertain a motion.
I'd like to see a motion to get Gene to lower up his camera a little bit so we can see more than he's at.
Only half of us are fans of the Y, Gene. There's another half that likes that other school, but you seem to be promoting the Y very good tonight.
I forgot to put on my NRA hat before the meeting.
Are you going to make a motion, Gene?
Hey, Braden, may I speak to the transparency of the permits, please? Is that okay?
Yes, please do. So
every permit that we issue goes through the public process. Whether they're conservation permits, we bring those to the RACs and the board. We do we bring the conservation permits through on a every 3 years, and so we highlight that, and the wildlife board gets the opportunity to vote on those. And then the other thing is with our public draw permits, Covy gets to bring those through on an annual basis. Expo permits are taken through every year on an annual basis. And then landowner association permits are also brought through to the RACs and the board. And then in addition to the general season landowner buck deer permits, the RACs and the board have passed and approved rules so that we can compensate landowners and build some tolerance through those programs, whether it's the general season buck deer permit for 640 acres or the 100 acres of agricultural crop. And so throughout the year, whether it's in the spring or the fall or the summer with the conservation and expo permits, we do bring every one of those through the public process and the board gets to vote on those. So is the question, I guess, that you want to see them all in one place at the same time? Is that kind of what I'm getting? Is that what you're getting at?
Yes, that's what I'm getting at. And I've been on the board for 5 years, and I don't ever remember anybody presenting anything about the agricultural permits.
Yeah, so those are rule changes that we brought through in the past, and so otherwise we wouldn't be giving these permits out at will. There's a process and a rule that governs the distribution of those, and so I just want to make sure we understood what the conversation was. So thank you.
And Justin, I heard Gene bring this up numerous times, and I do believe he has a good and valid point here. So we do hear all the recommendations, as you said, but we don't get to see them all unless we add them up ourselves. We don't see any charts from the division where it says, like the Pine Valley unit, which we've talked about. What are the total amount of tags given on that unit when you combine all these together? So we do get them brought up individually at separate meetings, but it would be nice to see a chart that showed each unit and all of the tags on that unit.
Yeah, and
so like a spreadsheet for every unit.
One thing just to clarify, the way that it works, Braden, is when we bring through public draw recommendations, all the other, like the expo permits, those are taken from the public draw. So if you approve 1,000 permits and there's 5 expo permits, then that's already accounted for in the public draw. It's taken from that. And so the conservation permits are added in addition. But I think I understand it better. And if we need to put something together like that to be more clear on what the distribution of those permits are, I think that's certainly something we can work towards. So.
Thank you. Appreciate you discussing that. Go ahead, Austin.
I have a question for Justin on that. To confirm what you said, so when we approve, say, the Henry Mountains rifled deer, total public permit number, the expo permit will come out of that before it'll go into the public draw. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
Okay, I think my comment to follow up with that, and I had this for later in the meeting, but what Gene is getting at in my mind and how I would like to comment is that we do not have those information columns. And so we're asked as a RAC to sit here and make decisions on adding 2 or 3 bison tags or 2 or 3 deer tags. And we don't see that implication. I need a conservation column. I need an expo column. I need a landowner column. Even if I can't adjust those, I need those for information on these recommendations so I can see what the total impact is if we vote to increase or decrease those tags. That's what I would like to see so that we can understand how many are carried through and what that puts out there during the hunting season.
Great.
So you're asking to see a whole picture, a whole spreadsheet, even though we're only voting on one portion of that.
Just a quick comment here is Gene has brought this up, I think every year that he's been on the RAC. And I don't know that I've ever disagreed with where he's coming from, but I also don't think we've ever had a motion on this. So we can continue to discuss it every year, or we could get a motion.
I'll make a motion that we ask that all the information of all the tags on each of the units be presented to the public on I don't know how to say it, but where we all can see it when we look at for the number of tags given or the number of tags available on a unit. That's probably the way when we look to see the number of tags available on a unit.
Okay, so let me read the motion that I just heard you propose, Gene. The motion I heard you say was ask the DWR to provide a summary that includes all of the tags that are issued on a unit in one place. Is that what you said?
That's readily available to the public.
Available for the public. Great. We have a second on that motion.
I'll second that.
Okay, any further discussion?
My only discussion on that, Mr. Chair, is do we need to put in there that we would have that available for the April meeting when we vote on recommendations? Or should we put a date on that?
Gene, would you be okay with amending the motion to include that language available for the April meeting? So not obviously not this year, but going forward, that this would be available for this April RAC meeting. So we would either need to amend the motion, or Gene, if you accept this as wording in your motion, we'd be okay to go forward.
I'll accept Austin's suggestion.
Okay, so let me read this again. So it says, ask the DWR to provide a summary that includes all of the tags that are issued on a unit in one place that is available to the public and available to the RACs and board in the April meeting.
I second that.
Any further discussion? Thanks, Tammy. Let's go ahead and vote on that. Austin?
Yes.
Bart?
Yes.
Gene?
Yes.
Riley?
Yes.
Chad?
Yes.
Nick?
Yes.
Chuck?
Yes.
Verlin,
Yes.
Craig,
Yes.
Tammy,
Yes.
and Dan.
Yes.
Gene, this may be inappropriate, but I would like to point out that this is kind of a monumental RAC. Not only did you make a motion, but it passed unanimously.
That's the first one I ever made. Well, no, not the first, but seldom do they pass.
Thanks, Gene. Any other motions?
Can I make a motion to accept the rest of the recommendations?
I think we're probably ready for that. So you can. Do we have a second on that?
Second.
Was that Dan that seconded it?
Yep.
Okay, so a motion by Tammy and a second by Dan to accept the remainder as presented. Any additional discussion? Okay, Austin.
Yes.
Bart.
Yes.
Gene.
No.
Riley.
Yes.
Chad.
Yes.
Nick.
Yes.
Chuck.
Yes.
Verlin.
Yes.
Craig.
Yes.
Tammy.
Yes.
And Dan.
Yes.
Gene, did you say no or yes on that?
I said no.
Okay.
And I'll qualify that. I'm in total agreement with the cuts that they make. I think that they have to be made. The deer will eventually come back, but I'm in total agreement with everything except I am voting no because we haven't made any corrections on being able to buy privilege into the general deer hunt tag situation.
Okay, thank you, Gene. So really you're voting opposition to the dedicated hunter program, correct?
Yes, particularly to the buying point.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to agenda item 6. And just a comment, I do appreciate the discussion. I've commented on this before. Although we all like short meetings, I don't think the purpose of the RAC is to have short meetings. We really want to discuss and flush out issues, and we're here to provide public input and come to an agreement. So item number 1 did take a little bit of time. I think that'll be the longest on the meeting, but I do appreciate that and think it's important to discuss until everyone's comfortable. So let's move on to agenda item 6, and I'll turn it over to Kevin for the public comments.
Okay, on this agenda item, where we had 32 people comment on the deer permit numbers, there was only 10 of there was a total of 33 people that provided comments. 10 of those made comments on this agenda item, so there's less to summarize. But the 3 items that came up were, again, some felt they wanted to reduce permit numbers from what's being proposed to, there was a comment to not allow archers to take cows on the archery elk hunt, on the general season archery elk hunt, and a request again from an archery standpoint to stop the multi-season elk hunts. But again, that was only one comment. Those 2 are both one comment out of 10, but they were made.
Thanks, Kevin. Questions from the RAC? Again, on bull elk and pronghorn.
Mr. Chair, this is Austin. I do have a quick question. As we rely on tooth data for bull elk harvested, some of these units, I understand, have an extremely small sample size. I'm just curious for Covy, what percentage of our harvest are actually turning in their teeth, and they're valid samples, obviously, that we can test? Do we have any idea where we're at there?
Kent, I've got Kent on data, so I'll ask him to look that up really quickly if he can. And Austin, you're right. When you the smaller the number of permits that we have out there, the fewer teeth we have per weapon type, and you see that in the data, the ages start to bounce. And by bounce, I mean it's not as smooth and consistent. On our large units, super smooth, super consistent. But I'll ask Ken if he'll answer what percentages look like.
So overall, 64% were turned in 2020. If you have a specific unit in mind, I'm happy to give you those data. But that's the overall rate.
No, thank you.
Kevin, you had another comment.
I forgot to summarize the percentages of those 10 people in office. Of those 10, 5 of them, so 50% indicated they strongly agree with the recommendations. We had 20% that were on the fence and either agreed or disagreed, and then 30% that were in the disagree column. So 5 of 10 agreed strongly, 3 of 10 disagreed at varying levels, and 2 of 10 didn't make a choice.
Boy, when it comes to hunting and how we argue back and forth, to get 50% that strongly agree, I say we just vote on this one and move forward.
Make a motion.
Right, other questions?
My question is just how far away are we on our spike bull and open bull permits of being a totally draw state instead of over the counter?
I hope we can maintain over the counter opportunity. I think I can speak for the division, and that's our goal. Our goal is to, I know that Lindy can talk about some of the things they put in place to try and maintain that. And it's great to have some over the counter opportunity. The goal is to maintain it. So Lindy, can you talk about the things you put in place to help maintain that?
Yeah, so this year we are actually dividing out the way we're selling the permits over the counter. So in July, you can go online or at an agent or to our division office and buy them by weapon type. So we're starting with archery. So you can start, let me pull up my calendar real quick. Sorry. I don't have the dates memorized yet. July 8th, you can go online and buy archery permits. And then we are setting July 13th where you can go buy the any bull elk permits. And then July 22nd, you can buy the spike any bull permits. And we're hoping that will divide up the crowds. So if you're interested in a certain type of general elk, you'll just go on that day and purchase it. Like Covy said, our goal is to keep them over the counter. But last year they did sell out in less than 8 hours. So that is our concern, and we're hoping by spreading it out by different days that will help slow that down so then people can have the opportunity to buy them.
I appreciate that. I just see that, the guys, particularly the open bull, if they don't get an open bull, then there'll be a big crowd at the spike hunt. I really think that'll be a real loss to Utah when we lose really the only open or over the counter tag that we got left. But I don't know how to avoid that with the growth population and the popularity of hunting.
Yes, supply and demand. The prices are going up each year, so we're doing the best that we can to hopefully, not get them out to the people that want them.
I guess the only other question is, what about the multi-season tag? When does it go on sale?
So they go on sale the same day. So if you're buying an any bull permit, you have to wait for July 13th to buy the multi-season any bull permit. And same with the spike. You have to wait till July 22nd to buy the spike multi-season permit. So it's still the same date of the type of general season elk.
All right. Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep.
Great question, Craig. Other questions?
Mr. Chair, one more quick question about tooth data. Covy, will we be collecting tooth data on all of the September archery and the hams hunts as well from elk? It just will not be recognized when we go to make permit recommendations. Is that correct?
Yeah, Austin. So that what we decided is there's a lot of unknowns in harvest success and how these hunts will turn out and the areas that they're in. And so we'll start to collect it and see where they come in, get a sense of how the hunts are going to go. And then when we rewrite the elk plan in 2 years, 2.5 years, well, we can then set an age objective for those units that we could work through and get everybody to agree upon. So that's the goal. Collect it now, evaluate it, see what it looks like, and make some decisions.
Any comments from the RAC? If there's no comments, we really didn't have any discussion that would warrant a standalone motion. We could probably go ahead and entertain any motion that you may have. If you want to go ahead and make a motion to accept as presented, or we can have additional discussion.
This is Chad. I motion that we accept the plan as presented.
I'll second it. This is Nick.
Okay, so Chad made a motion to accept as presented. Nick seconded that. Any additional discussion? Okay, let's take a vote. Austin?
Yes.
Bart?
Yes.
Gene?
Yes.
Riley?
Yes.
Chad?
Yes.
Nick?
Yes.
Chuck?
Yes.
Verlin?
Yes.
Craig?
Yes.
Tammy?
Yes.
And Dan? Dan, are you on? We lost Dan. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Chad and Nick made the motion and seconded it, correct? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, on to agenda item number 7. Once in a lifetime permit recommendations. Again, I'll turn it over to Kevin to give us the public comment.
This one will go really quick. We only had 4 comments, or 4 people that indicated that they watched the presentation, and of those, 3 strongly agreed. 1 indicated they didn't agree nor disagree, and we didn't have no written comments.
Thank you, Kevin. Questions from the RAC? Go ahead, Austin.
Mr. Chair, I have a question. I'll bring up an example. Look, I'm curious, and I'll use the South San Juan sheep unit as the example. I'm trying to use the plan on how RAM tags are issued and make sense of that. And so I'm curious, when they did a flight, or any flight, for example, but this flight was most recently in November of last year, and they count all the rams, and I understand we can create a permit recommendation based on total rams counted or the classification. Do they classify the rams from the air? And is that why permits stay low? Is it doesn't work in my math, and that's why I'm curious why the recommendation of only 2 permits on the San Juan South Bighorn sheep.
Yeah, I can answer that. Yes. So as you mentioned, we can make a recommendation on either 12 to 25% of all of the counted rams, or 30 to 60% of all of the rams that are older than 6 years old. And the classification of the ram does take place from the air. This can get pretty tricky, but with sheep, where you can get a decent look at them, at times it's a lot easier than you think, and sometimes it's pretty tricky. And so the biologists do pretty good. They do a great job at trying to classify those from the air and make that recommendation. And so, yeah, Austin, I mean, that's the long and the short answer is the classification that we get from that flight then gets made into the recommendation to stay with fairly low permits,
Part of the other reason with low permits, though, is we're talking about populations that are on average much lower than what we just got done discussing, right? Our bighorn sheep and our once in a lifetime species across the state are at much lower population densities than our elk and our deer or even our pronghorn. And so even though we make our recommendations off the classification, it's important to remember that we're just dealing with much, much lower densities and smaller population sizes overall.
I might ask one more question, probably for Riley. I understand we're proposing increasing the Henry Mountains bison permit substantially. And from what I understood in the presentation, this is going to put us below the objective after the season. Is that concerning to the biologists? Is that where we want to be? Is that where we should be? That's my question.
Austin, this is Kevin. We just happen to have the biologist on. I think Wade Paskett from the Southeastern region joined us, so let's just let him answer that.
Okay, hello. Yeah, so it is low compared to what we would like to recommend, but the drought is pretty severe down on the Henry Mountains in that area, and so it's not too low that it's concerning, but it is a step lower than we've been in 10 years. So our objective is 325 adults and yearlings after the hunt. And this recommendation will put us at 290. So 35 adults or yearlings lower than the objective, but it's workable, and we feel it's necessary because of the drought. So does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You bet.
So Wade, while you're still on, let me ask a quick question. So you're talking general or the total permits, but what's your success rate?
So
on hunter success, I mean, realistically.
So last year we had high success on our hunter's choice. It was 91%. On the cow, we were 75%. If we have high success, we're going to harvest 10 more animals than the 290. It would bring us down to 280 if we have similar successes last year. But this recommendation is based on average success. So generally, hunter's choice is in the probably mid 80s, sometimes low 80s, and the cow was 75%, sometimes a little less.
So just maybe I should save this for the comment period, but as a landowner and one that deals with horses, which to me the bison are very similar impact as what the horses do, aren't the bison probably the least affected by the drought? I mean, as far as body condition and that kind of stuff, I mean, it's not like they're really suffering, but they cover a lot of country trying to eat and drink water and whatever else. Is that?
They do cover a lot of country, and they go our GPS collars that we had, showed that most all of them were up on the side hills of the mountains, up on the foothills, not necessarily on the flats. Now, some of them, of course, are on the flats, but they move around to find the grass that's available. And based upon, some of the bison that were harvested and the amount of fat that they had, the bison were doing all right in consideration of the drought. So
Okay.
I mean, this is Kent Hershey. I'd like to just comment as well. We don't see it in the survival of the adults, but you will see it in reduced pregnancy. You'll see it in reduced. We don't have great estimates of calf survival. We don't collar them, but we do know that our calf-cow ratios following drought are much lower. So clearly there is an impact on that recruitment. And that's why you see this fluctuation in permits. From last year, it was really low. That's coming out of that 2018 drought. Permits are up this year because of the increased recruitment. So you're not going to see it necessarily in survival. It's always going to be high in that upper 90s range, but you will certainly see it in pregnancy rates and calf survival.
I have a question on the bison hunt down there on the Henrys also, and I know this was discussed a little bit in the central rack, but the archery permits, I was really surprised to see the number on that. So we saw a large increase on the rifle permits, and the archery permits are appear to be fairly conservative. Now, if I remember the discussion from December, there was a lot of discussion on when to have that archery hunt, and it was decided that if we put it at the end of the season, we'd have very low success rates. That archery hunt is a high demand hunt. People are using almost as many points for it as the rifle. The determination was put it at the end of the season, so the success rate would be abysmal, frankly, I think was the discussion. There's some discussion there may not even be success at that time of year, but yet we only have 3 tags. It seems to me that that's an opportunity to really deal with point creep. People want to hunt them. People want to apply. They're burning a lot of points. It's a way to handle some of that point creep, and especially if we're increasing tags. Why did we keep that one so conservative?
Yeah, so our reasoning on that was, and there's actually going to be, there'll be a total of 5 archery permits, you know, based upon the draw plus conservation, or the non-resident permits. But we want to see what the success will be. We want to make sure we have the harvest so we get down to the level that we would like at 290. And you know, if we get if we have good success on that late archery hunt, then we can increase more next year. So that's the reason. Does that make sense?
No, that didn't. So if we have good success, we'd increase the tags. That seems counterintuitive. I would think that if we had poor success, we'd increase the tags, because the idea is we're looking at that overall harvest. So if people are using a lot of points, we're having low success rates. It seems like that's a great opportunity to increase permits to help with the point creep.
Okay, so because we manage the bison so closely to the numbers, we know what the success rate, average success rate is for our any weapon hunts. I mean, we have multiple years of that. We don't have that track record for a January archery hunt. So to make sure that we get the harvest success that we need, we put most of the permits into the any weapon hunts, into the all the hunter's choice any weapon hunts, and fewer into the archery. And so
Wade, can I hop in too, Braden? I think we're talking about a couple different things. And so I hear what you're saying, and I agree with you that we don't always sell permits expecting 100% success on a hunt. And sometimes those lower success hunts are where we can give more opportunity because people are just aching to get out and go. And so I hear what you're saying, and I've talked to Wade about this, and I know that that we're on the same page, that, you know, that is kind of a preference hunt, and somebody that draws in any weapon hunt can pick up a bow. But if it is the RAC's desire to add a couple of permits to that, we may have very low success. And I don't know that we're strongly against that one way or another. The recommendation, as we were talking to Wade, and Wade, feel free to chime in if I'm misrepresenting, has a lot to do with just the preference and how many hunters we have in the any weapon pool as compared to the archery, and the any weapon pool can hunt with an archery tag. However, if it is the RAC's discretion and desire to add a few more of those for opportunity's sake, that is something that 1 or 2 certainly does not make a difference, especially being late January hunt might have very low success. And so does that help answer the question as well? And Wade, did I make sure that I represented correctly? I thought maybe we were talking about 2 different things and wanted to chime in there.
Yeah, that's fine.
Hey, this is Verlin. Hey, we put those archery tags in there as a way to harvest some bulls without moving them off the mountain and down on the desert. And what it turned out, it didn't work. And basically, that's the deal on the archery. So they moved it so that there'd still be some people could hunt archery. So they moved it to the end because it didn't work where they had it. You guys have talked numbers. There's not a rancher that runs down there that didn't cut his herd this winter. There's a severe drought. When we had our bison meeting, you guys failed to mention it, but you got a lot of flack from the ranchers of not cutting them enough. And, you know, we heard that the bison, they range out. Well, they don't range out until they've pulverized the range that's closest to the water. It's not a good thing. It's not much different than what I assume the wild horses are, but the range is hurt down there. It'll never come back, and it's not the cattle that's done it. It's been the numbers of buffalo that historically have been there, and we finally got your attention, and we're not going to quit fighting it. But that 290, we appreciate it being down there, but it ought to be closer to 200. It's the habitat, it's the resource that's damaged. We talked about it when you mentioned these couple of units on the deer. It was a drought. You guys mentioned drought. Well, this whole state's in a drought, and that's why I don't argue about any cuts on these deer tags, but the cuts need to happen if you're going to save the resource. And there is a big problem on the Henrys, and there's a big problem with the elk herd too.
And let me pause real quick and make sure we don't have any more questions before we get into additional comments. Any other questions? And then we'll jump into comments. All right, let's go ahead and we'll have some comments. I'll make a comment if no one else wants to. I do appreciate the answer to the question that I had on the buffalo. My comment to that would be, when there was a push several years back to get some limited entry tags for archery, one of the suggestions that went along with that is lower success rates would allow more people the opportunity without impacting the resource. Particularly to this Henry's bison, moving into that late hunt, the comment was made in December that we may see a 0 success rate. It was widely accepted that this would be horrible success rates. And we are trying to decrease that herd. To only have 3 in the draw, I guess there's 5 total. It just seems like that's super conservative. The success rate will be low. I think also, you know, the point was made that we need some data of what these success rates look like. I would suggest that with 5 permits, the data becomes so subjective. You know, we talked about it earlier with tooth data on elk units with small amounts. I think 5 would be smaller than any of those units with that tooth data. I don't think 5 permits is going to give us any data that we can work with in the future. I would suggest that's an opportunity to allow those with a lot of points to move through the point pool, to allow some opportunity. I think there's a lot of opportunity that we could allow with minimum impact to the resource. You know, I will reach out here and agree with Verland. we may want some more impact to the resource. So even if we did take some more animals, I think the locals down there would be on board with that. That'd be my comment on the buffalo on the Henrys.
I would agree with you, Braden and Verlin as well. I hear a lot of this from the counties, you know, on both ends of the spectrum on the bison. They just make a huge impact, and they're very resilient animals. I don't think we're ever gonna put a dent in them. And like you said, five permits just seem nothing. I mean, that's not going to put any kind of a dent in it.
Yeah, I think the bison, we need to take the number down because the resource is down. Because bison, if anything, bison and elk are probably the two animals that can recover quicker than any other species we got to handle.
Mr. Chair, I have a comment. This is Austin. I'm going to bring up a comment about applying for these once-in-a-lifetime tags before we have permit numbers set. I know this has been brought up before, and Lindy did give us a great presentation last year about her schedule and why it takes so long to get draw results. This continues to get brought up. My comment is, if we operated a true random draw with bonus points where all of the tags were allocated randomly, I think our schedule is fine and this wouldn't be an issue. I see this as an issue that is driving point creep, that the division is purposely driving point creep up by not allowing us to see permit recommendations before we apply or before the deadline. Perfect example is this bison issue. There's a lot of applicants that submitted their application by March 4th, which was the deadline this year, for the Book Cliffs, trying to get a bison tag, and they have a lot of bonus points. And now we quadruple the tags for residents on a lot of these Henry Mountains, and there's a lot of Book Cliff applicants that wish they applied for the Henry Mountains now, and therefore they will add a point and continue in the point creep game forever, because they cannot see how many tags are going to be available. So the RAC members understand at least 50% of all permits have to go to the guys with the most bonus points. The idea is to pull them out of the pool when they get drawn. But this setting the tag numbers so late in the game after they've applied and not allowing modifications is not doing us the favors, and it's not doing any favors to residents or non-residents. If the vendor cannot do it in time, meaning run the draw from the board meeting the end of April and produce results, I suggest we get an RFP and find a new vendor that can press buttons faster and run the database. We've seen it in many other states. They can run a draw pretty quickly, and Utah is now one of 2 states left that does not have tag numbers before the draw period. All the other states in the West have tag numbers so that you can plan and hopefully address point creep. So there's my comment. I didn't have another position on the agenda that would have been better to bring that up than now.
Austin, I want to jump in here. This is an issue that I've discussed for years. It's bothered me, but in the last 2 years, we've seen more extreme examples of where this issue comes to light. This year with the buffalo, last year we had sheep on, I think, Kaparowitz, which was a huge swing, and we didn't allow people to make an educated decision. As you know, Austin, and others know, it's a big business, a very big business that helps hunters figure out how to use their points. They have thousands of dollars invested into these points over tens of years, 20 plus years, and they are going into these draws blind. I just feel the same as you, Austin. I think there's got to be a better way. I understand we don't have our numbers until this board meeting, so let's just push back the draw results a couple of weeks. I think there's got to be a better way. Any other comments? Go ahead, Gene.
while we're talking points, I think that our point system is probably the fairest way that they can distribute tags. But when does it overload? We're going to have people that by the time they draw that buffalo tag, the kids have got to weld a gun rack on their walker so they can go hunt them. And we've just, it's really tough. Speaking of my own outfit, I spend a lot of money putting my kids in for tags. And they messed it up quite a bit because, I'm too busy this year. Let's take the bonus points. And you know, for a buffalo tag, you've got to commit. You've got to max out your credit cards, mortgage the home, and quit your job, whatever it takes to get out there and do that. And so by the time they get through with taking the bonus point instead of trying to get it drawn, and then the old man don't have horses and can't outfit them anymore, they say, oh, to hell with it. It's just I don't know. We're just having a hard time getting there, and a lot of people are getting to be too old even to hunt elk by the time they manage to draw them out. That's just a comment.
So Gene, this is Kevin. If I could summarize your comment, the point system is the fairest way to do it, but it's still frustrating as hell.
Can you say hell with a BYU hat on?
I sure as hell can.
Good comment, Gene. Thanks. Any other comments? We have a few items here. We've talked about really they've primarily been focused on the buffalo, on the Henrys. Is there anything besides that? Oh, and then we also have the comment of seeing permit numbers before they apply. I don't know that fits under any agenda items on this agenda, but it's probably as good to make a motion here as anywhere. So we'd entertain motions if anyone wants to propose or make a motion. We'd entertain that at this time.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a quick motion. I move that we increase the Henry Mountains archery only hunter's choice from 4 tags to 6 tags for this year.
Okay, so a motion to do the archery tags from 4 to 6 on the Henry.
I second that. This is Riley.
Seconded by Riley. Do we have any discussion on that motion?
Is that enough tags? 2
It's
tags
never
doesn't.
enough.
Berlin, would you like to propose 40 perhaps?
I better go with the 4. Or go with the motion. I'll second it if it ever gets that far.
It's already seconded. We have
It's already set. I was going to say 10. Let's go at least. Let's round it up to 10.
This is Chuck. I know this ship's kind of sailed a little while ago, but hunting with an archery equipment in January is pretty tough. I've done that before, and it doesn't function as well as the rest of your equipment. And so I would really like to see that hunt move back to the front if it's not causing chaos with taking the number of buffalo. But I've hunted crawling in the snow in January with a bow, and it is really tough to do and keep your equipment functioning. So it seems like we've relegated the lowest number in the worst spot to the guys who have the lowest chance to do anything.
And Chuck, I think just as a comment, some history on that. it was by design. We did try to put this hunt at the first, and when we did that, and Verlin understands this probably better than anyone, the goal was to be able to harvest animals and keep them up off those winter allotments. And it worked for maybe a year. And then when we increased permit numbers, it pushed them right back out early. And so in managing bison and working with producers and everybody else on the mountain, it just won't work at that early time of year. And at this point, we're not interested in moving it back.
Well, my quick comment there too, and I realize there's several opinions, but my opinion would be the idea when these were presented is to have them be a low success hunt to allow more permits. And that early hunt wasn't a low success hunt. So not only was it not a low success hunt, but it also caused the problems on the range. This late hunt is going to be brutal, but it's an opportunity to give a lot of tags with little success and move people through the points. So we have a motion to increase from 4 to 6. It's been seconded. We've had some discussion. Any additional discussion? Are we ready to vote? Let's go to vote. Austin.
Yes.
Art.
Yes.
Gene.
Yes.
Riley.
Yes.
Chad.
No.
Nick.
Yes.
Chuck.
Yes.
Verlin.
Yes.
Craig.
Yes.
Tammy.
Yes.
And Dan.
Yes.
And Craig, did you want to state a reason for the no?
I didn't
Oh,
say no.
sorry,
I said
Chad.
yes.
Chad, sorry.
You know, I'd rather see how the hunt goes this year and what the success rate is before we raise the numbers. That's the reason.
Okay, thank you. Vote passes with 1 no. Thank you. On to agenda item number. Oh, sorry, I got ahead of myself. That was one motion. We still would entertain any additional motions or to pass the remainder as presented.
Mr. Chair, I don't see, like you said, how setting permit numbers and changing that schedule would go into here. It fit into this agenda item. It would be nice to recommend that the board instructs the department to look at that and to change something. But I don't know if this is a proper place. So let's make a motion to accept the balance of the once in a lifetime recommendations as presented.
Okay, so we have a motion to accept the remainder as presented. Do we have a second?
Second that. Second that.
So motion by Austin and a second by Tammy. Any additional discussion? All right, let's vote. Austin.
Yes.
Bart.
Yes.
Gene.
Yes.
Riley.
Yes.
Chad.
Yes.
Nick.
Yes.
Chuck.
Yes.
Verlin.
Yes.
Craig.
Yes.
Tammy.
Yes.
And Dan.
Yes.
Yes, first by Austin and it was seconded by Riley. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Let's go on to agenda item number 8, antlerless permit recommendations. And again, I'll turn it over to Kevin so he can give us the public recommendations. We're pushing him a little bit. He's trying to type and get to it. So give him just a second here.
All right. On this agenda item, we had a total of 7 people that submitted comments. 43% strongly agreed. Another 42% somewhat agreed. So 84% people of the people that commented agreed at some level, and then 14% strongly disagreed. A smattering of comments that came in. Some comments about this is specific to the Zion. A request to have more balance between the private lands and the draw cow permits on the Zion. That's kind of gone back and forth. We're trying to find the sweet spot there. Again, several comments that we shouldn't be having any doe hunts. I think there's a lot of nuance in why we have doe hunts in places that we do, and oftentimes it's an attempt to, we're targeting resident deer that are causing problems and are really in a place where we don't want deer. And so there are good reasons to have doe permits, if I could make a little comment there, even in the time where we have low deer population numbers. So a comment about too many cow tags, so similar issue on elk. And then some comments about we're getting out of balance with our bull to cow ratios as we're trying to, in areas where we're offering trophy bull hunts and also trying to manage the population objective. And there's probably some places where that is the case. And it does give us concern to have herds where we have, really high bull to cow ratios, and we'll address those as we have opportunities.
Thanks, Kevin. Questions from the RAC?
Mr.
I can
Chair,
see it there, Austin. Go ahead.
I have a question. What was the success of the archery California bighorn hunt out on the Newfoundland mountains? Do we have those numbers from last year? I see we're offering 10 permits once again for the archery only. Do we know how those hunters did last year?
Yeah, we can get those numbers. Can't we pull those up? And as he does that, Austin, I just want you to just acknowledge that we do give you Antlerless information before the application. So you're welcome.
Months before, Covy, months before.
And oddly enough, it's amazing how many points people are using on the Antlerless hunts.
It truly is. No, I understand it's frustrating. I get it, and it's something that we we'll continue to work on. It's hard to speed up the data. We probably need to look at some other things to help with the process and providing some information.
Maybe, Mr. Chair, I'll ask one more question while he's looking up that bighorn data. But help us understand, since we're in the southern region, this Zion elk flip-flop. Like, are we chasing the elk onto private and they're not using private land only tags? And so now we need public tags. Like, I see 300 frustrated hunters with these public tags if they apply unknowing. And I know there's going to be a pop-up on the draw, but that's a lot of private land to have 300 cow tags on the Zion.
So can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so we are actually taking the permits from the private lands only hunt and putting them into the draw. The reason being that I've had a lot of complaints from private landowners. If you remember last year's RAC, we had some landowners come and they're seeing a lot of trespass with these private lands only tags. Some of the hunters that are buying these tags are interpreting them as a trespass permit, and they're not. So we decided to shift some of those permits back into the draw. It actually expands the area. If a hunter has access to private land, they can go hunt private land. If they don't have access to private land, they can go on the public land. It is a net increase in permits by 60 permits of what was last year. We flew the unit in the first part of February this year and was significantly over objective. So we're trying to work with the landowners and reduce trespass as well as address the elk population. Does that cover it?
Yeah, thank you, Jason.
Yeah, in that U hunt, it was 70% success. So 7 out of 10 guys killed.
I have a question that I get asked frequently, and because this is a public meeting, I think it would be good to just get the answer from the division in a public meeting. I feel like I probably have got the answer, but let me ask. On the cow hunt specifically, there's a lot of concern of how many those are, and they're kind of back to back. We have hunters on the range all the time, particularly the late hunts. So there's a lot of concern for the deer, as we've already discussed. There's a lot of different reasons that we feel like the deer are not doing well, but there's a lot of concern that part of that is just pressure and human pressure on those deer. Yeah, we're hunting cow elk in January. We have seen some early hunts on those, but on many of our units, they just kind of go back to back clear to the end of January. Could you address why we have those January hunts and if they are necessary, and why we don't look at doing more? We can start those August 1st. Why are we doing them January versus August, and just kind of the pros and cons?
Yeah. So Braden, we this came up at the board a couple years ago too, and we committed at that time that we wouldn't have January hunts where we didn't need them. And what it comes down to is it's a combination of managing to the population objective and harvesting the right animal at the right time. So what we don't want to do is end up in a situation where we may be managing to the population objective and able to do that all in August and September. And then we get into a situation where we have depredation in key areas or high conflict or other problems and have to issue additional permits and still have that same pressure. But now we're doubling it up in August and January. So when we put one of these hunts on the landscape, we think through it and say, okay, we can try to harvest and work through the rest of we've got 6 months to harvest these animals, and we can work the best way we can through these months to harvest as many as we can. And this January cow hunt allows us to target specific areas where we have current problems, and where those animals cause problems. And there's two sides to that too, Braden. One side is if we have an area, you're right, there's additional hunting pressure on the landscape when we're hunting elk. And it allows us, where we may have some conflict and overlap with elk and deer, it allows us to alleviate and possibly move those elk to where they're not competing as much with the deer in that area. So there can be a plus side to that as well. We will keep our commitment to the board. The board asked us to have these when we needed them, and we'll keep that commitment and evaluate that every year and ask ourselves those questions.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer again. That's a very common question, so I think it's good discussion.
How to farm this is a question. I did elk in August. Basically, what you're saying, a dead elk in August don't equal a dead elk in January.
It may be the wrong elk, is what I'm saying. It may be the wrong cow. It may not be the animal that causes the conflict in January, and we still may need to remove that animal in January as well. And so, trying to manage that all together, at times it's a difficult balance, and we do our best.
Okay, another question. Big cuts in the doe antelope and the cow elk on the Dutton, and other places, but it really shows on the Dutton. I'd like to have somebody just kind of explain that.
I can answer that, Gene. Do you want answers to both or just specifically pronghorn?
Well, the cuts have been big on both the pronghorns and the cow elk. So yes, both.
So we've taken some pretty big cuts in pronghorn permits. We've just had low fawn recruitment, significantly below objective. Our objective is 800 and we're down to just about 300. So we're just in rebound mode, just trying to build pronghorn. We don't have any excess on the landscape we need to take. With the elk, same thing. We're just chronically under objective. Our objective is 1,500, and when I flew last year, we were just barely under 1,200 elk. So we're just in grow mode on those units. We're just below objective.
There's 60 public tags available on the Dutton and 50 private tags. That looks like it's it's directed to the private more than it ought to be, and there ought to be more opportunity.
That's just mainly to address, depredation concerns. We have some private ground there in Johns Valley, Anemone, Circle areas that we have a lot of conflict with agriculture. So that's the concept behind those private lands, so we can keep pressure on elk that are causing problems. Kind of back to Covy's comment, we're trying to target specific elk with those. So that's the reasoning behind those.
Okay, thanks.
So, Chair, I have a question. This is Austin. Question about moose, antlerless moose. And I forgive my not understanding of this, but is that managed by Riley primarily, or unit biologists? I'm trying to understand. A 50% cut in antlerless moose is alarming. I know neighboring states like Idaho just cut 96% of their antlerless moose. So I'm curious, who makes those decisions, and are we strictly managing to the plan, or are we managing socially? I don't understand the moose.
Yeah, that is a good question, Austin. And those recommendations primarily come from the biologist, and most of these moose are found in the northern region, and specifically the antlerless moose that we have. And on this, I think that Covy, if you may want to help me out on specifically the cuts on the antlerless, but I believe it has to do with, we were over a while looking at our body condition on the moose, and even though we continued to cut the permits on the antlerless moose, we were not seeing the changes in the body conditions, and as a result, we were just chipping away at our herd and not getting any return for the decrease in permits. And so the biologist looked at it and made the decision that we were at a sufficient level, and decided that was low enough to cut. And I did a hack job on that, Austin. And Covy, if you have anything you'd like to add, please clarify. But to the first part of your question, it is from the biologists that make that recommendation.
Yeah. And primarily the cut, the big cut was the north slope. And what it came down to is when Dave Rich, Dave and I had a good conversation about this, and there's some habitat work that needs to be done up there to improve body condition. Dave's aware of it. We need to move some things around, and it's what Riley said. As he looked at what was going on with the moose population, he wasn't seeing the bang for his buck that he wanted to see with the antlerless moose permits. And so right now they're working to readjust some things and address some habitat issues, and hopefully that, with what they've already reduced in population, will give them the boost they need to do better. The moose on the north slope has struggled. I don't think it's no secret. Our moose population is at the fringe of their southern latitude or habitat, and at times they peak and crash. We're aware of that. We try to manage the populations below a carrying capacity and look at those things. And in this situation, we just chose to address habitat instead of harvesting antlerless.
Let's go ahead and entertain comments, or I guess not entertain, that's what we use for motions, but let's move to comments. Any comments from the RAC on the antlerless permit recommendations?
I'll make one. Go ahead, Gene.
This is Gene. We've been cut back on deer for a lot of years, and the family deer camp pretty well went to hell. And so we started looking to getting cow permits and doe antelope permits to have something getting out to hunt. And we enjoyed those hunts. Now, last year we had a poor year on drawing. This year we may not get anything drawn, and the the elk tags and the doe elk tags are looking pretty thin. Plus, I'm not technically proficient enough to get into that spike antler elk hunt and compete with all the other electronic efforts to get one of those tags. So it's looking kind of grim for us, and I'm concerned about and have been concerned about how the numbers have jumped from the public elk tags to the private elk tags. And when it started, it was to educate a few elk to get back on the public land. That was how it started. And now it's gone all to heck, to where there's so many private tags compared to the opportunities on the public. Years ago, we drew a cow elk tag in Johns Valley that the reason for the hunt was extreme depredation. We tried to get across Sorensen's land and they wouldn't let us. There was this little herd of elk over on the Griffin top side that we could see. Couldn't get across Sorensen's land. Polygamous wouldn't let us through there. And the pot grower sure as hell didn't want me to go through his place. So we went over on the other side and shot a cow that wasn't bothering anybody. I guess my problem is that I go back to days of old when you could go onto private land and landowners were acceptable to that. And somewhere along the way we've lost that. But I just want to see as much public opportunity as we can, and I'm not too sympathetic with the landowners that won't allow people to go on their land to hunt, and I don't think that we should be given a plethora of tags in that direction, especially when we're taking them from the public opportunity.
Thanks, Gene. Other comments? If there's no additional comments, we'd entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion that we accept the recommendations.
Tammy made a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Sorry, who was that?
Chuck with a frog in his throat.
Thanks, Chuck. So Tammy made a motion to accept as presented. Chuck seconded that. Any additional discussion? All right, let's vote. Austin.
Yes.
Bart?
Yes.
Gene?
Yes.
Riley?
Yes.
Chad?
Yes.
Nick?
Yes.
Chuck?
Yes.
Verlin?
Yes.
Craig?
Yes.
Tammy?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous. Let's move on to agenda item number 9. So this is the CWMU Antlerless permit recommendations. So again, we'll give it to Kevin to give us some public comments on this.
All right, we're in the home stretch, folks. Thanks for staying with us and staying with the process and continuing to ask good questions and and vet these. On this agenda item, we only had 3 people that commented. 2 of them strongly agreed with the recommendations, and I honestly don't get this, that some of the people take time to comment and then say they don't either agree or disagree, that they're just right in the middle. So we had 2 out of the 3 strongly agree and 1 that didn't agree or disagree.
Sounds good. Thanks, Kevin. Questions from the RAC? And we go right into comments from the RAC. I think a lot of the questions and comments on this are very similar to agenda item 8, but comments from the RAC on this.
I have a comment, Mr. Chair. This is Austin. And kind of a question as well. This gets brought up every time where people say they don't understand the CWMU process. They don't feel there's enough transparency. Is there a website, or should there be a website set up as part of the DWR that shows everybody these are the choices a CWMU operator has? He must have this many acres. He can choose a 90-10, and then X happens. I mean, do we say we're going to do more education and teach the public? Do we have a site set up for that where you don't have to read the rules or a packet to understand?
Yeah, currently we don't have anything on there. It would be referring to the rule or to these presentations. Part of the board in the December board meeting, they've asked us to come back with an education packet. So coming up this summer, there will be an education packet that I'm working with the CWMU Association to put that together, to hopefully they'll be able to put that on our website and be able to educate people more about the CWMU program. So it is in the works.
Any additional comments? Okay, go ahead and entertain a motion if we're ready.
This is Chad. I motion to accept the plan as presented.
Okay, Chad made a motion to accept as presented. Do we have a second?
I'll second it. Nick.
Nick seconded the motion. Any further discussion? There wasn't much discussion to begin with, so I'm guessing there's not additional discussion. Let's go ahead and go to vote. Austin?
Yes.
Bart?
Yes.
Gene? Do we lose Gene? All right, Riley?
Yes.
Chad?
Yes.
Nick?
Yes.
Chuck?
Yes.
Verlin?
Yes.
Craig?
Yes.
Tammy?
Yes.
And Dan?
Yes.
All right, motion passes unanimous. I guess Gene was so excited to get a motion and have it pass unanimous, he just left early. I'm not sure what happened. Let's move on to agenda item number 10, last one. Kevin, we'll give it to you again to summarize the public input.
Okay, you guys can decide what to do with this one. We had 3 people that commented. One of them strongly agreed, one of them disagreed, and one of them didn't agree or disagree. So not much help in the public comments there.
All right, questions from the RAC. Justin's got off real easy on this and the other 2 RACs. I think you need to really give him a curveball.
Not here.
This is Austin. I got 3 questions. First one, a new group that joins, the 0.5% market share. I mean, that's like, thanks for coming. We'll throw you a bear tag. But how do they increase and eventually take more of that market share to balance out, or can they?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Austin. With the 0.5% increase in market share, that's actually an increase in what the old rule would allow. initially it would only allow up to 20,000 permit or $20,000 of conservation permits. And if we do 0.5, it'll be more than that based on the last 3-year average. So I know it's not a ton to start out with, but it's actually an increase, which was one of the ideas behind it. And then the way that you can increase the market share is if you take a conservation permit that sold for, say, $10,000 over the last 3 years, and you take that and you sell it for 20,000 moving forward, that's how you get more market share, and that's how you get more permits. And so the goal of this program is to raise money for wildlife, and so it rewards high performers that sell those permits for more money. Did that help at all?
Perfect, thank you. My next question, if I may, is are non-resident or national groups eligible to apply for conservation permits?
We'll have groups like, take the National Wild Turkey Federation. They've got a Utah chapter, and they do conservation work for a conservation species in Utah. And so that chapter is eligible for the conservation permit program. And so as long as they are doing conservation work for species in Utah, then that would suffice.
Okay, and to clarify, so a national organization without a chapter, like a Wild Sheep National or a SCI, they could come in and bid if they wanted.
Yeah, we have those organizations. We have SCI and Wild Sheep Foundation now, and we work with their Utah chapters. Yes.
One other question. Can you define direct purchase? On one of your last slides, you talked about direct purchase, but I didn't understand what that meant and why it needed to be changed.
Yeah, so thanks for bringing that up. With the direct purchase, sometimes there's a conservation organization will pay for a product directly, as opposed to giving that money to the division and then we pay for it. And so an example of this would be if we're trapping bighorn sheep in Utah or in Nevada, for instance, and trying to bring those animals to Utah. Nevada may already have a capture company that they're working with that we don't have a contract with. And so we can't pay for it. And so they do a direct pay for that. And so what we want to do is highlight if there's going to be direct payments, then we can request or require a competitive bid process or discuss the benefits ahead of time prior to the division approving that purchase. So, but I would say the majority of it, I mean, overwhelmingly, it goes through our WRI process, our Watershed Restoration Initiative, which has a lot of contracts in place already. So, but we just have a few exceptions where it doesn't.
One last quick question, Justin. How long can they hold over funds, conservation organization, from year to year?
2 years.
2 years. Okay.
Yeah, and then they've got to commit those those funds to conservation work.
At the beginning of this meeting, I discussed watching the meeting that kind of allocates some of these funds. Also, just working. I've worked with conservation groups for a number of years and involved up at the Hunt Expo, and seeing the money raised, and then also watching where it goes. Could you tell us how much was allocated this year? Do you have that number?
I don't have that off the top. Oh, Kevin, did you have something?
Remember that it was $3.1 million were committed to habitat projects by the conservation groups at the meeting a couple of weeks ago. Several of those were in the southern region, including a project that I'm involved with out on Indian Peaks, and then several up around on the Monroe and the Boulder units. I think probably most of the units in the southern region, maybe not all of them, but the majority of them had projects that received conservation permit funding through that meeting. But it was $3.1 million were committed to habitat projects just for this next fiscal year.
All right, thank you. I knew it was a large number. I didn't remember. Just another comment I would make is I watched that meeting. I was surprised. It seemed, at least, I don't know what the data is, but it seemed that there is more effort and more projects going up on the mountains than down lower this year. And I know that that's been a focus. It's been a concern as our summer habitat. And as I watched the meeting, it seemed like that was definitely a focus.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I would agree with that. I think we've done a lot of good work on our summer range or on our winter ranges. And a lot of the work we've been doing with monitoring deer and getting body condition evaluations every winter and some of that, kind of the idea is if we can put more fat on them on their summer range going into winter, they'll have a better shot of surviving that. Summer range projects can be difficult at times, but as an agency, we would love to get more work done in the transitional and summer ranges. And so that's been an emphasis moving forward. So.
Chuck, I hate to put you on the spot, but just be curious to maybe hear your comment on that from a Forest Service standpoint, if you're comfortable.
So you're going to have to repeat that. I was reading part of this rule again, and so I missed your question. So go ahead.
I was just curious if you had any input on the work that's happening on the Forest Service land this year. It does appear that we're doing more summer and mid-range projects than we have historically, and the impact that has. Again, if you're comfortable commenting, if not, that's fine.
No, sure. We are targeting more summer range projects, especially on the Boulder Mountains, and there are other areas where we're trying to get NEPA clearances so that we can begin to do that work, because that's really one of the bottlenecks that we have to get through. Is we have to get through that NEPA process, and so we're working directly to do that with the Division of Wildlife and state agencies. So yeah, I think we've got some of those that are in progress right now that have gotten clearance. And hopefully in the next few years, we'll have quite a few acres cleared where we can chip away at those projects and get some of that conifer habitat that's just really blow down in black timber and good for pine martens and squirrels, and that's about it, and open that up a little bit again. So we're working towards that.
Thanks, Chuck. It is exciting to see that going forward, more than I've seen historically. Any other comments? Conservation permit rule amendments.
I've got a question about do all these everything's going to 3 years, does all these start on the same year? Do they all run the very same 3-year cycle?
Yes, they would, Gene.
And what year would be the start of the 3-year cycle?
So we will have that meeting this spring and summer, and so it would start for next year. It'd be 2022 through 2024.
Okay, are we in comments too?
Yeah.
Okay. A few years ago, the age objective on Mount Dutton and Panguitch Lake was changed, and it took a lot of permits off from there because they weren't reaching the age objective in the first place, and they got raised up, and so they cut a bunch of permits. The next year, of course, it didn't change much, so they cut a bunch more permits. And I asked about the conservation permits and so forth. If they were getting cut, they weren't getting cut. It was a 3-year thing. Well, after 3 years, the conservation permits on those 2 units were about 16.5% of all the tags on those units. And that didn't really sit very well with me or others that wanted to draw those units. And if you're going to have this 3-year cycle, Are we going to get whacked with that again and again and again?
Any additional comments? Gene, was that you stated that was going to be a comment. Was it a question? Or maybe I misunderstood.
Yeah, it kind of got to a question on the end. I would like to know what's going to happen. Can you, if you make a 3-year contract, that's the 3-year contract from the situation that it is when you start it, and no matter what the hell, it can't be adjusted. Can it be adjusted if tags are increased, but it can't be adjusted if tags are decreased?
Gene, this is Ken. I'd just like to make a comment and clarification for everybody. So I went back and just looked at the conservation permits really quickly. In 2014, there were 6 issued, and that was when we had a high number of public draw permits. I can look up that exact number, but I don't have it off the top of my head. In 2017, that was reduced to 5 as we started decreasing tags. In 2020, that was down to 3, which is also what it is this year. So those permits have decreased as those public draw permits decreased, and that is how that program works. It might take a couple years lag because of the 3-year cycle, but it will be decreased or increased as the public draw tags are adjusted.
Yeah, and I would add to that. I think Gene, you bring up a good point, and that's it does need to adjust, and it does. The rule has formulas that show that conservation permits increase or decrease based on the public draw permits. But once we set those in the 3-year cycle and we have units increase in the public draw, we don't interrupt that 3-year cycle and add more conservation permits to it as well. And so I understand that you're focusing on the times that there might be disproportionately lower public draw permits when that happens. But I also want to point out there are times that we increase public draw permits, and the conservation permits take a few years to lag and catch up as well. And so it's I guess it happens on both sides.
Thank you. Additional comments?
What about those that do buy conservation permits? Does that take away points? Is there any waiting period?
I think we'll let Lindy tackle that if she's still on. Lindy, are you still on with us?
I am. Sorry, just couldn't find my mouse to take off the microphone. So our limited entry permits, if you buy a conservation permit, so your limited entry elk, deer, and pronghorn, you do not lose your points or get a waiting period. But if you buy a once in a lifetime permit, so your moose, bison, sheep, and goat, you do obtain the once in life waiting period. So they can no longer apply in the Utah drawing for that particular species. And that applies to conservation, CWMU, expo. We treat those all the same.
But a person can buy a conservation permit year after year after year. Is that right?
Yes, they can.
Thank you. I think we're probably ready to entertain a motion.
I guess I'll make a motion that we accept the recommendations.
I'm glad someone did. Thanks, Tammy. We have a motion to entertain, and Craig seconded the motion as presented. Additional discussion. Yeah, Tammy made the motion and Craig seconded it. Okay, let's vote. Austin.
Yes.
Bart.
Yes.
Gene. No.
Riley.
Yes.
Chad,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
Chuck,
Yes.
Berlin,
Yes.
Craig,
Yes.
Tammy,
Yes.
and Dan.
Yes.
And Jean, did you want to comment on your no?
Just that I'm generally against pay to slay.
Okay, thanks, Jean. With that, that's the end of our agenda. Our next RAC, I always forget to come prepared with this. There it is. Our next RAC is May 18th, time to be determined. Appreciate everyone's comments on this RAC. This is always a big RAC. It was interesting to watch tonight. Just a quick comment. And I don't know if this is good or bad, but we had more unanimous votes in the Southern region than maybe the Southern region's ever had on this RAC item. I think part of that's we're getting better information. We understand it better. I don't know all the reasons, but it's probably a good thing that we're seeing that. I think that's a good sign. So appreciate everybody's efforts and appreciate the discussion and the questions. Thank you. Kevin has a comment. Go ahead, Kevin.
Let me just ask, typically this next RAC, I think we would start at 6:30 or 7. It's probably not going to be an overly long meeting. Is there a strong preference from the RAC members on a starting time?
Any chance that it might be live?
I don't think this one will be, but the next one, I think there's a chance.
Okay.
I'd say 6 or 7. I don't care.
6 is a good time, I think.
Yeah, I'd vote for 6.
Okay, we'll plan on 6 o'clock. Bart, did you have a comment?
No, I concurred with 6.
Okay, thanks, everybody. Good job tonight.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good one.
Thanks, all.
Thanks.
Thanks.